Tonight I shall blossom in the dazzling light of the rose.
My story begins with the revelation of a huge secret, hidden beneath what seemed to be an ordinary marriage. Just when I thought everything was going well, I was shaken by a great betrayal. I found out that the woman I had loved and trusted for years had been cheating on me. However, this wasn't just an act of infidelity. It was a discovery that overturned the truth of the past years before. Dive into my story. If you don't want your life to be turned upside down like mine, subscribe to my channel to learn real lessons from the real stories we share every day, just like mine also. Share your thoughts about the shocking truth I've experienced in the comments, and please show your support by liking my video. Now that you've subscribed, let's dive into my story as usual. Jim and I got off work and headed home. It was our routine after work. Sometimes he would pick me up. Sometimes I would pick him up. That day I was driving, and Jim said he wanted to stop by the pharmacy to get some medicine for his wife. The pharmacy we got her medicine from was right next to the place where my wife, Rachel, worked. She had been working there for 6 years. But I had never visited her at work yet. That day something inside me said I should surprise Rachel. When we arrived at the pharmacy, I went inside. Rachel was supposed to be working that day, but she wasn't around. I asked the clerk about Rachel, but the clerk shrugged. I think she's in the back with her boss. He said. I waited a few minutes, but Rachel didn't show up. Jim got his medicine in the meantime, and I left the pharmacy with growing suspicion about where Rachel could be. The thoughts that crossed my mind were eating me up. Where could Rachel be? Why wasn't she around? I had thought that everything between us was perfect during all the years we had spent at home. But something had started to feel strange. Just a few weeks ago, everything had seemed ordinary. But that day, I began to sense that something was wrong beneath the surface. When we got home that evening, I noticed the unease on Rachel's face. It was as if she had something to say to me, but the words were stuck in her throat. At that moment, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Fear. Seeing fear in her eyes surprised me. Yet I stayed silent. I wasn't ready to confront her. But a storm was raging inside me. That night as I lay in bed, I watched Rachel's face. She looked peaceful while she slept. But there was a storm raging inside me. One question echoed in my mind. Is she hiding something from me? The next morning before heading to work, I said goodbye to her as usual. But the unease inside me was growing. After dropping Jim off at his house after work, I decided to go back to Rachel's pharmacy. This time I really wanted to see her. When I arrived at the pharmacy, I learned that her boss wasn't at work that day. This information confused me even more. Rachel should have been there if she was working with her boss, but she wasn't on my way home. My suspicion grew even stronger. Was Rachel truly loyal to me? While I wrestled with my doubts, I was also afraid of discovering the truth. Over the next few days, I observed Rachel's every move. The signs that she was hiding something from me became more apparent. One day, I decided to leave work early and follow Rachel. I was determined not to back down from this decision. I borrowed Jim's truck and was set on finding out where Rachel was going. After dropping our daughter Sandy off at school, Rachel didn't head toward the pharmacy, but took a different direction. I followed her closely and eventually saw her arrive at a small cabin by the lake. She parked her car and went inside. The anger inside me was swelling. After waiting for a while, I saw an SUV pull up next to Rachel's car. The man who got out was the answer to everything. She had been lying to me for years. Rachel's infidelity was now crystal clear before my eyes. I waited a little longer and finally decided to go inside. When I peeked through the cabin window, what I saw confirmed everything. Rachel was with another man. At that moment, everything inside me collapsed. I felt both anger and immense disappointment. It was hard to accept that the woman I loved had betrayed me like this. When I got home, I didn't know what to say to Rachel. I waited for her to confess this betrayal while looking into her eyes, but she remained silent with the anger building inside me. I began to plan what I needed to do before confronting her. I would do whatever it took not to lose my daughter Sandy. The next day, I consulted a lawyer and decided to initiate divorce proceedings. However, I wouldn't win the case without solid proof. I resolved to follow Rachel and her lover again. Documenting their meetings at the lake house was my strongest card. A few days later, I caught Rachel with that man again. And this time I recorded it on video. Now I had both visual and emotional evidence. I was determined to leave Rachel. But it wasn't just about me and Rachel. It was also about our daughter Sandy's future. Rachel's betrayal had destroyed not just me, but also our family that night. I sat Rachel down and told her I knew everything. We had reached a point of no return. Rachel apologized crying. But those apologies couldn't heal the hurt inside me. I would fight for Sandy that night. Rachel sat across from me, looking at me with regret in her eyes. Tears silently streamed down her cheeks. But it was too late. My trust in her, my love, everything was destroyed. Every word she spoke created a deep void inside me. I lied to you, she said in a trembling voice. This affair has been going on for a long time. But I didn't mean to hurt you. When I heard those words, a surge of anger erupted inside me. She didn't mean to hurt me. How could I ever forgive this betrayal? Just thinking that our daughter Sandy was unaware of all this caused me even more pain. My love for her was beyond anything else, and I had no intention of leaving her in this chaos. As Rachel continued to cry silently, the anger inside me turned into cold determination. This betrayal wasn't just destroying a marriage. It was about to destroy a family. I would do whatever it took to not lose Sandy. I shot Rachel a sharp look. How could you do this? I said, barely controlling the rage in my voice. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed Sandy too. How could you do this to someone? Rachel paused for a moment. Her eyes stared blankly at the ground. I didn't mean to hurt you, she repeated, but that didn't calm me. There was no turning back now. My trust and love for her were completely gone. The woman in front of me was not the Rachel I had known for years. She was a stranger. The only thing on my mind was Sandy's future. The next morning, as Rachel got ready for work, I silently watched her. I was trying to understand the thoughts in her head. Was she preparing to leave me? Or did she still think she could save everything for me? Things had already ended. We were on a path of no return. I was determined to sign the divorce papers and do whatever it took to protect Sandy. That day, I made an appointment with my lawyer and went to his office to discuss all the details. I had evidence of Rachel's affair with her lover. I had recorded their meetings at the lake house. But the lawyer told me things might not be as easy as I thought. The fact that I wasn't Sandy's biological father could deal a huge blow to my case. If Rachel proves that Sandy's father is someone else, you stand a very high risk of losing her, my lawyer said with a serious expression. Those words instilled a deep fear in me. Even if Sandy wasn't my biological daughter, my love for her was beyond anything else. Losing her to a stranger would be my worst nightmare. But because of Rachel's betrayal, everything was at risk. I had to be extremely careful not to lose Sandy. Without a moment hesitation, I decided to distance Rachel even further. When Rachel came home, she had already sensed that something had changed. I no longer responded with silence. I didn't touch her or speak to her. I only showed my love for Sandy. Protecting her had become my sole purpose. When I dropped Sandy off at school, I hugged her more tightly than ever before. I would take every precaution to ensure she was safe. That evening, I decided to sit down and talk to Rachel. I looked into her eyes and gave her one last chance. If you continue this affair, I said in a cold voice, you will never see Sandy again. You will have no place in her life. Rachel looked at me with fear in her eyes. No, she said, trembling. She's my daughter. I can't lose her. But there was no turning back. Now Rachel had to make a choice. She would either stay with Sandy and leave that man, or she would run away with him and completely lose Sandy. It would be her choice, but I would never let go of Sandy. After telling her this, Rachel's face turned pale. She tried to say something, but the words were caught in her throat. The next day, I went back to the pharmacy where Rachel worked. I was determined to confront her boss, Carl Clarkson. I wanted to talk to him and clear things up. When I arrived at the pharmacy, they told me Clarkson wasn't there. I waited anyway. Confronting him was the first step to ending everything. But I couldn't find Clarkson. This made me even angrier. A week later, Rachel suddenly left the house. She didn't say anything to me. She just left quietly. I didn't stop her. Everything between us was already over. After she left, a silence fell over the house. I had to explain everything to Sandy, but how she was still just a child. How could she understand why her mother had left? I told her your mom will be away for a while. The innocence in her eyes broke my heart even more. Rachel's departure became a turning point for me. From that moment on, I focused entirely on Sandy. Her future meant everything to me. Rachel might want to come back, but it was already too late. From this point forward, I was determined to build a future for Sandy by myself. As the days passed, the fact that Rachel wasn't coming back became even more clear. I knew I would never see her again. Raising Sandy and being both her mother and father became my new mission. During this process, I pulled myself together and became a strong father for Sandy. Rachel's betrayal had changed my life, but I hadn't lost Sandy in conclusion. This betrayal was one of the hardest experiences of my life, but at the same time it taught me what true love really means. Sandy was the meaning of my life, and together we moved forward with confidence into the future. I never forgave Rachel, but her leaving led to a stronger bond between me and Sandy. When it was all over, it was just Sandy and me, and that was worth more than anything to me.